Hello, good morning. We're going to be starting in the next few minutes. We've got people joining already. So this is going to be a great webinar. We're going to be started soon.
Turn on the light here.
Well, let's get started. So welcome everyone. We are starting our series, Iconic Talks. We are basically organizing this webinar series in three areas that we love: product strategy, product design, product engineering. This one, it's about successfully executing MVPs and PoCs. And I think we have two outstanding panelists with us, Kenny Miller from the Recount and then Craig Goodwin from Cyvatar. In this webinar today, we're going to talk about a few things. So one of them, it's starting with what's an MVP at POC, and then moving actually forward to, okay, when do you use one or the other? How do you prioritize what goes in and shouldn't go in? Think about reducing risks, for example. How does that help you to reduce risks? And then I think one of the elements that is super important is because of the background, both from Kenny and Craig, that work at startups and at large corporations, having that insight of, okay, how this relates to when you're working at a large company, how do you just communicate an MVP and get it together there when you want to execute it. We have a really interesting audience. We have on the more than 100 people joining us today, and we have a really interesting mix of companies. So we have small companies to very large companies from different spaces. Fintech, for example, we have people from Morgan Stanley, Capital One, Staff.com, Pivot, which is on the streaming side. So we have a really diverse audience and also a really diverse set of roles. People from engineering, product management, VPs, directors, a lot of people that are really, really caring about products, both from the strategy side, product side, and design side. Before we're getting started, we want to remind that we are celebrating two things today. So one of them, it's Black History Month, which is really important for us. So if you follow us, you're going to see we're doing a series with three Black founders and tech leaders that we work really close with. So one of them, BC Silver, he's president from the Capital Corp, a fintech company based in LA and Kansas. And then we have Corey White, CEO of Cyvatar, who's also somebody that we're featuring this month, and Sasha K. Parker from Disney. So this is an area that is super important to us. And then the second one is that today is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And we want to celebrate 34% of our attendees are women, which is, again, something that we celebrate a lot. And also with our Iconic Women Initiative, we contribute to different communities, Geek Girl Meetup, Latinas in Tech, and the such. And we have come in the past 4 years for, embarrassingly, we having only one woman in the company. Now 37% of our company is women in all areas: product, engineering, design, leadership. One of our associate partners is women. So it's something that we're also really, really proud of. With that, we want to get started. So we have, again, two outstanding speakers today. So we have Kenny Miller, President and CEO of The Recount, and we have Craig Goodwin, a co-founder and chief product and strategy officer of Cyvatar. They both are people that I admire, that we work really close with, and definitely we would love to hear all your learnings and your experience. So with that, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. So I'm going to start with Kenny and give you a couple of minutes so you can introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kenny Miller. I am the CEO of Recount Media currently. I've been working at this company for about a year and a half. We're a startup digital media news organization that is really dedicated to finding new expressions of news natively on the platforms that matter today. And we look at that in two different ways. Social media is obviously super important, and we have a big and vibrant presence on Twitter that we're really proud of, and that we've actually, in our first year in business, have delivered 1 billion impressions mostly across Twitter. And we've done that by looking at the platform not as a way to gather audience and try to make them go to a new place, but to really address that audience natively on platform. And that, is always, I think, an important aspect of all these things is understanding the dynamics of different audiences on different platforms. It's not always the same. So social is really important for us. Obviously, a lot of news happens on Twitter, and a lot of political news happens directly on Twitter. So we're right there with that. And what we've been doing since launching our Twitter presence is expanding into more long form content. So we have a partnership with iHeartRadio to publish podcasts. Basically, we co-produce them with them. We make them, they distribute them and monetize them, which is a great relationship for a small company like the Recount. And now we're looking at expanding into more, if the idea of fast channels is, it makes sense to you, that's what we're interested in, which is FAST stands for free ad-supported television, just the way television used to be before streaming. So that's a big topic in our shop, and that's a big effort in terms of expanding the content and putting together new distribution and ad models around that content.
Awesome. Thank you, Kenny. And now let's jump to Craig.
Awesome, thanks. I just learned more from Kenny in the last 2 minutes about media than I knew in my lifetime, so that's super cool. Hey, great to be here. So my name's Craig Goodwin. I'm co-founder, chief product and strategy officer of a company called Cyvatar. We're revolutionizing the cybersecurity industry with cybersecurity as a service. So traditional cybersecurity, I know there's some CTOs, a lot of technology folks in the audience who will be familiar with the archaic and complicated way that you normally consume or purchase cybersecurity in the industry. It's incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult to do, and we want to blow that up. So we are calling BS on the way that the industry does cybersecurity right now, and finding new and innovative ways to do that, which include membership services. So our customers are not customers to us, they're members. Subscription-based solutions, which makes consumption really easy, and we're streaming that stuff so that everyone can consume it. We want to make sure that even small businesses, rather than it being the preserve of enterprises, can effectively protect themselves and get value out of everything they do from a cybersecurity perspective. Me, personally, I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about 20 years, building large global security functions, building security products. So been on both sides of selling security products and using security products. So yeah, super excited to be here. We've had a fantastic partnership with Hello Iconic up until now, who have been an incredible design and development partner for us. And I've learned a lot through the process, as has the team. So looking forward to sharing some of those learnings today.
Awesome, thank you. I'll just do a quick intro about Hello Iconic. I'm Jorge, one of the founders and CTO of Hello Iconic. We are basically a digital products agency. We focus on consumer products, so talk about mobile apps, web, and a lot of OTT and streaming. Our areas of focus are basically the verticals of media, but specifically we have a strength on the streaming world. So with Roku partners, with Samsung partners as well, and we have launched numerous times different platforms and products on the streaming side. We do have a strength in fintech as well. So we have built like wallets. We're working on the DeFi space as well from the blockchain side. We have worked on the banking integrations to Salesforce Financial Cloud and similar. So that's another area that we work with. And then we have other verticals, education and such. One of the things that we help a lot, and that's why we like this subject, is we are normally called when somebody has an idea and wants to build a product from the ground up. So just thinking about, okay, proof of concept, how do we know it's possible? And then at the same time, what is the first thing that we need to launch and how do we evolve from there? So that's something that we help companies work with. And that's something that we love and basically have optimized our company for working on those type of projects. But I think we all want to get started and start discussing about successfully executing MVPs and POCs. So let's get started with the panel. So the first thing that I want to do is actually I want to share an image that I saw. So a couple of days ago, I started to see activity about this specific subject on Twitter. So this is something that caught my attention. Let me see if we're able to share it and you're able to see it. So this is a tweet from a founder, a Latin American founder, a very successful Shark Tank from Colombia. And he's basically sharing like what's a MVP and POC. This is a very common image, how not to build a minimum viable product. And we see a couple of ways, and he's suggesting, and we've seen this picture in other places as well. So with this, and just reading about like Eric Ries, how does Eric Ries define a minimum viable product? An MVP is that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. So that's his definition of MVP. And then proof of concept, forgive me, I took this from Wikipedia, so hopefully it's not gonna be awful, but basically it's just proof of concept or proof of principle, realization of a certain method or idea in order to demonstrate its feasibility. So with that, actually, in this image, I would like to start with asking you a very simple question, like what do you think about this image? And at the same time, what's for you an MVP and what's a POC and the difference with it? And would love to start with Kenny and learn your opinion.
You know, it's interesting. I was trying to interpret all of those different graphs there. And, you know, I mean, maybe I'm just too optimistic. They all look like there were paths to doing it. Can you put that back up for a second? Because I think it's actually, you know, it's a little bit of a false dichotomy in terms of how you decide what to do with it. Because I think it depends. I mean, I think all of these things, it's about cultivating enthusiasm, right? Like you're using your proof of concept or your MVP to figure out what the user wants. It's like you want to figure out how to cultivate user enthusiasm, right? But I think back to some of the projects that we've done, Jorge, and I think sometimes we had an MVP that was really like just a wheel on the first part. And I think it depends on who you're talking to about viability, right? If it's a pure product organization and you're like, oh man, I made a wheel, and other people can look at that and say, oh, okay, we could build a lot of things out of that. That's like an informing principle. But I think if you're actually going for financing or trying to convince your manager that it's the right idea, then you have to deal with not just what is the definition of it, but who is the audience for it and what are you trying to learn? So I think really framing up the problem before you decide what your MVP is the key moment. And often a lot of this stuff is coming from the world of startups where people are like, okay, it's lean startup. And that means you have $75,000 to prove that this can actually be a big thing. And so you need to do it in a certain way. But I think there's a lot of applications of this of problems. And so understanding what the problem is, I think, is where you should start.
Yeah, and I personally didn't know what to think when I saw, and I agree. And at the same time, and I had this discussion separately with different people, and I've heard the same opinion of you, that the false dichotomy element to it, right?
Right. I mean, just because it was like one of the first things that Jorge and I ever did together was he created this, basically a really, really simple camera app that just put a hat on people's heads. And I would say that's a wheel, right? That was like, okay, it's a wheel. You could put a hat on a head or anybody's head and that's fine. And we grew that from that to a whole system that, built around that idea, as opposed to maybe, I guess you could argue lots of different ways, but I think it depends on the audience.
Yeah. Awesome. And honestly, you had in that first version, we had to put the face in the hat. The hat was fixed. Craig, we'd love to hear your thoughts also about this and MVPs and that difference on your perspective from what's an MVP and a POC.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say was the worst thing about this picture is that ultimately everyone gets to the right outcome in the end, which is throwing me right off, right? So you can do it anyway, but you'll get to the same result, which is not the right way to picture it, if anything. The other two need to fail miserably in some way, I think, to make the diagram work. But anyway, diagram aside, I think from our perspective, certainly what we did was slightly different. I mean, what we looked at was creating something that really hadn't existed before. And I know most people claim that is the case when they go about building a product, but for us, it was genuinely true, right? What we were attempting to build was very new to market, and we were trying to do some very, very different things. So for me, the basic differences, if you boil it down to the core concepts, the POC for us was about proving what was really possible. And that meant actually moving away, because I think there's a tendency, and I have this tendency as well. And luckily I've got a really good product management director working with me, Steph, who pushes me away from this. But there is a tendency to want to move towards the real sexy stuff, right? And prove in the POC that the sexy bits, the bits that look good, that you want to see because you're naturally excited about building a different product or your new product. Whereas really it's the boring bits for the most part. And certainly that was true for us. The ability to ingest APIs on the back end and actually prove that you could get that data in a usable format in some way was really, really important for us, but was no means the sexy part of the product that we ultimately wanted to build. So we had to move away from that to prove the concept of what we were trying to create. With an MVP, you've got to start looking at customer feedback. If you want to build a genuine minimum viable product, it's got to be about what the customer wants to see and what the customer wants in their hands. And that's not the case with a POC. So for me, as we move towards MVP, it was about taking what we proved in the POC, drawing a line under that, and then utilizing the MVP process to create something that actually demonstrated what we ultimately wanted the product to do and allow the customers to test it to make sure that they're actually achieving something that they needed as well, and that there was market demand for it. So that was kind of how we dressed up POC versus MVP. Perfect.
And I think this is really interesting because I want to segue to that part, like how one of the questions that we normally see and face with people that we work with and even ourselves is like, how do you prioritize? Like what goes in an MVP? Like how do you choose? Okay, this is what we should do first, and then this is, I don't know if you know what you have to do second, but at least how do you prioritize? What's the first thing that you have to do? We'd love to hear your thoughts, Kenny. What do you think about it? Yeah.
The first thing. It usually in the situations that I've been in, we're usually coming with a lot of constraints in terms of, what you can do, because many of the products that I've been involved with are about the distribution of content. And so even though it's sometimes a bummer in terms of like trying to find a really great version of the product, understanding the constraints at the beginning has always been something that if you don't do it at the beginning, there's pain. There's pain later because you've kind of let the team go down a direction that potentially is going to be like, oh, that's perfect, except it's never going to work because there's this other thing that's a huge blocker for the effort.
And one of the things that specifically about the recount that caught my eye was that at the beginning you started, for example, you said you launch, and then on the web you actually use a CMS, like a well-known CMS for testing first. And then I remember when we started discussing, you said, okay, no, we need to move away from this and need to launch now a version that it's our own code base. Like what led you to that decision? And how was the experience of starting with something that was packaged and then actually jump into something that was
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, once again, I think it depends on like where you're trying to go, what you're trying to achieve. Packaged software, if you're trying to do something that is a tried and true thing, packaged software is great. It works for the marketplace. Like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's so much benefit there. But I also think that there's sort of generational change in software development and software management, where things that people used to think was hard has sort of inhabited their heads about what you actually can get done. So I think moving from packaged software to a more custom solution, which is what we did for the Recount CMS, was it wasn't just, it was faster, cheaper, and better. It wasn't sort of in the normal trade-offs where you're like, well, this is going to be expensive. You're going to need to deal with it yourself, because we were trying to do something different. We're making a short form video destination that also then was dealing with social distribution and all the off the shelf stuff. There was really nothing that was exactly right.
Awesome. Great. We'd love to hear your thoughts also on this. Like, how do you prioritize? And Kenny, for example, mentioned things about constraints and such. And like, how do you prioritize what's on an MVP or a POC? It would be great to know.
Badly, probably, is the honest answer. But no, I think the most of it sounds obvious, but I think the most important thing when embarking upon an MVP or whatever is defining what that functions are, what those core functions are. Like, what is the vision? I hate scope creep. It doesn't matter whether you're building a product or anything else. Scope creep is a continual problem, because you're always being pulled in a multitude of different ways, right? Whether it's from customers, and now as we're growing up as a business, we get input from internal technical teams, right? They want certain things. You get users or customers that clearly want certain things. So you have those pulls in multitude of different directions. I think for MVP, it's about business vision at the end of the day. It's about product vision. Like, what is it you're trying to build? What is the core functionality of what it is that you're trying to build? And then you need to align the MVP around that and stay focused on that. Because ultimately, like Kenny mentioned, for most companies that are looking for MVP, they've got a set amount of money, they've got a set amount of time. And the important thing is defining what it is they want to build and then proving it in the market, making sure it's something that customers or users actually want and will need. And if you haven't achieved that by the point of the MVP, then you've ultimately failed, right? So I think it's about balancing those things. In the early days, it's a little bit blinkered. It's about, this is what my vision is, this is what I want to build. Like, I need to go after that for this period of time. And then to your point, Jorge, after that, it gets a lot more complicated, right? Then you've got various different parties with various different feeds wanting you to do a ton of different things. And that ultimately, again, still comes down to what is the value from this? Like, what is it we're trying to achieve? And the art of any good product manager, product owner, product development person is balancing all of those requests, is balancing all those different demands, deciding what is most important for the business and for the customers, and building the roadmap around that. So, I mean, perhaps I'm simplifying it, but in the early days, it's easier for me. Like, this is my vision. This is what I want to build. Go after that. And then that's when you recruit much better product managers than me to come in and then deal with all of those different roadmaps and deal with all of those different inputs to help you to balance things effectively.
And for you in Cyvatar specifically, what was that thing? Like, what was the vision? And you said, okay, I think we need to do this first, because otherwise we are not.
I can't say, Jorge. We're releasing. Like, I can't say. No, I'm kidding. So for us, it was about building an operating system, a true platform play for the cybersecurity industry. For us, it was really interesting because it wasn't, and this is something we're still building and learning as we grow, it wasn't about a traditional product play, right? We didn't want to go and build another cybersecurity product, because there are 4,500 out there, or whatever the crazy number is today. We wanted to make it a true platform. So for us, it was about workflow. It was proving that you could intertwine the technologies that were in the industry with process and with people into a single platform. So as I mentioned earlier, for POC, what that meant was, could we ingest from those existing tools? Like, was that the art of the possible, or out of the gate were we already failing because technologically you just couldn't ingest those data and you couldn't utilize it to do what you wanted to do? Luckily, in the modern world, with everyone being API driven, we were able to technically prove that that was the case in the POC. And then for the MVP, it's about proving that you can connect people, process, and technology into one place that adds additional value above and beyond that individual product to the customer that you're serving. And in our case, that means being able to visually and in the UI and UX deal with all those complex issues in a simple way and connect those workflows together. So for us, it was very much a kind of platform consideration more than a single product consideration.
Awesome. I love some of the codes, the art of the possible. That's actually, it has the name of a book, I think, for POCs.
Yeah, it's coming out this month.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
It's funny. It's the unofficial tagline for the ITP school at NYU, which is it's basically, I think it's the art of the recently possible. And that's kind of like where they want to live, which is, I think the recently gives it more of that like edgy.
I can't claim it's mine now, Kenny. Now you've told me where it came from. Like I thought I made it up.
I don't think they, that's all the great steal. Just
yeah.
Out it.
Awesome. I have another question in this area. So we talk about prioritizing, and we talked a little bit of what's important and the sequence of it. But how, like when you do an MVP and a POC, I think one of the main questions that we have is, how do you know it's successful? Like, how do you evaluate and say, okay, actually, yeah, we were successful in this, and with that, we will do this. Yeah, Kenny, like if you could share your thoughts and also some examples of areas where you think, okay, yeah, and I think we learned this was successful. Or not. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, once again, I think it's like if you're like if you go back to how you framed up the problem and what the purpose of it was at the beginning, because it is objectively not and subjectively not meant to be the entire product. I mean, I think that's like the biggest mistake is you're like, oh, here, people who maybe don't understand the technology. So this is who you're trying to sell to. Is it about making sure that there's a consumer fit? Is there it's B2B test, as Craig was saying, like, yes, you're actually taking it out and testing it with people in that kind of way. In this, I may be sort of stepping a little bit on where we're going to go when we start talking about small companies versus big companies. But I think one of the biggest learnings that I've had over the last 2 or 3 years is just understanding the other constraints, right? Because we've gotten to the place where it used to be developing products was the hardest thing to do. And now I think developing useful products is the hardest thing to do, because developing products is just not hard anymore. It's not that there's not a lot of talent and love and effort that needs to go into making a good one. I'm not saying anyone can do it, but it's gone from being a very, very rare skill that first there were just some magicians in Silicon Valley that could do it, right? And they would name themselves. You should go, there's a great documentary called General Magic that if anyone wants to look at like sort of the idea of demos. I mean, it's funny, actually, I'm sort of like, it is built into the culture of technology to make demos and to make proofs of concepts and minimum viable products, both because, you want to be efficient in what you develop. And so people want to ship stuff, but also at the, I worked in Apple's R&D labs for a while, and there it was all about demos. It was just about like, you could hack together, if you needed to hack together 20 computers in order to do something that showed what you could do, that'd be great. You would go do that. And at the MIT Media Lab, I think they had their mantra was demo or die. Like, that's it. It's like, if you can't make a demo, I don't want to hear you talk about what this thing could be or should be. I want to actually see it and touch it. And I think as technologists, you have that ability to, with a small team, make an actual functioning thing, right? Like, if the three of us decided we want to go make an electric car, we can't do that with 3 people or 5 people or 7 people. It's like, you need $1 billion to go sort of get into that game. So I think like the desire to demo, I'm actually going somewhere with this, where it's, I was an engineer undergrad. I was a developer for a while. And the desire to make something is kind of in the heart of every single person who gets into this business somewhere. Like, that's one of the distinguishing factors, is you can go and make something. But then you realize that it's the function of that thing within the bigger system that is where you get a lot of success or connection. And so as I've sort of worked in sort of successively bigger businesses, those other factors have become even more important. So measuring the success, I definitely think there's been projects that I've done over the last couple of years that were absolutely great products, absolutely solved a consumer problem, but did not address the internal friction at the company in terms of, I just believed if you did the right thing and it was good for the audience and it actually was a good piece of software, that would then find its way out into the world. And the social engineering aspects of making business work is not to be underestimated, I think, in the definition of what you want to get out of this proof of concept. I would have been more successful with some of those projects if at the beginning I had said, the goal of this is to convince the president of this $1 billion division that this is the right idea. And, I think sometimes I want to know that it works before I start to push and claim that it's great. And that might already be too late, because you need them on board from the beginning in terms of, we're doing this thing, it's risky and hard. This is how we're going to know if it's a good idea or not. So like, widening the circle of people who are in on the bet is, I think, a good way to try to get outside just the product is more than just the spec. It's the effect on the organization.
Yeah, and we're going to spend more time on this, because I think the communication, as you're saying, and especially in large companies, it's something that it's really important. So we're going to come back to this, and I think this was great. And Craig, like the same, like how on your perspective, how do you know the POC was successful and an MVP is successful for you? Yeah.
So I think it's a couple of things. I think first and foremost, it's about viability, right? I think so. Concept of kind of failing fast. Like, I like it as a concept. I just hate the word fail. Like, people say fail fast, yeah. But I think the stigma with fail is just too great, right? And actually, it's not about failure and things like viability. Does it work? Does it work? That's never a black and white thing. There's a gray area in the middle somewhere. And the likely answer will be, yeah, some of it's viable. and that's okay, right? You've proved assumptions as you go through that. So it's about those assumptions that you made early. Like, are they true? Are they false? We made some big ones, bringing it back home. With Cyvatar, like, if we're going to be able to do this, then the assumption's got to be that we can use all those tools that already exist in the market to enable our tool. And if that hadn't been true, then we would have failed dramatically, And then I think usability is big. Like, are people going to use it? And then I think less POC, obviously, but moving into MVP, as I mentioned earlier, like, do people want to use it? I think that's key. It's tough early on, but if you're getting it into the hands of customers early, and Steph and my team have made a point of doing that as early as is physically possible, you're starting to show that there is demand and show that there is need in the market for doing it. So I think it's viability, proving assumptions and proving demand in the market is kind of would be my focus. Now, I don't have any exact answers as to what the right answer for that is or what success looks like, but I think you'll know it when you feel it, and at least having a focus on those things means that you're aiming towards the right goals from the start. I think that's how we look at it.
Awesome. Our team is reminding us. So you can ask questions. We have a Q&A section on Zoom. Please be able to send your questions. We will be definitely reading them at the last like 15 minutes of the webinar. And some of them we'll try to cover as we're discussing it. And actually, you kind of jump a little bit to another topic, which is more about the product strategy side of products. And one of the things, Craig, that I remember is that so at the beginning, we did the POC, then we started working on the MVP, and then I remember you said it was like let's launch the assessment. So there is always this debate of when to launch, and that was like a month, like a I don't know 2-4 weeks in. It's like, no, we're going to launch this, and we're going to launch it this date. And I mean, I think it was a really interesting and great decision. Like I've seen many people creating products that have that fear of launching. So definitely would love to learn more. Like what was your thought process there? And you mentioned probably Stephanie there on the equation, but we'd love to learn more how this decision came to be.
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of things. I think as a start, so, parking the big business conversation for a minute, because that's a completely different conversation altogether. But I think the fantastic opportunity you've got as a startup is that you're launching relatively quietly, right? No matter what you're launching, like you've got the ability to launch relatively quietly. So I think launching quickly is an important thing because it gets it out there and makes it real. Kenny mentioned demos, which essentially for a startup is a very similar thing, right? It's getting it into the hands of people to play with it. And for the most part, like I would say, you can do as much QA as you want, but ultimately 90% of the stuff that you're going to find, whether it's, and I don't just mean, bugs or whatever, but I also mean, actual usability issues or ideas for next sprints, all that kind of stuff comes out of people playing with that product tool, whatever it is that you're doing, right? And actually you mentioned the assessment there, by pushing us to launch that kind of assessment, the findings that we had, the stuff that we learned through that process wasn't all positive, but it was all learning, right? And we came out of that with much greater knowledge than we ever would have had if that assessment just existed in a sandbox in the back end somewhere, and it was just as good as the Hello Iconic team are. If it was just Hello Iconic playing with it, we definitely wouldn't have learned as much as we have today by getting out to people, getting out to the market, however small that is, and having people play and mess around with it. So I think me and Steph, from a product perspective, are very keen on releasing it as quickly as possible, getting the value out there, getting people seeing it. I think, ultimately, when you get to the bigger company, you talk about reputational impacts of releasing something too quickly. But quite frankly, for me, I think in the modern world, a bit like people are getting more used to cybersecurity and cybersecurity conversation, having to worry about it. People are getting much used to, from a consumer. For example, I drive a Tesla, right? Every Tesla driver knows that if you put yourself in that early release program, you get some crap stuff that Elon has to go away and fix, right? But we accept that. We accept that as a slight downside of being ahead of the curve and adopting that stuff. And for the most part, I think depending on the audience that you're focusing on, people accept that. Make that beta program, whatever you want to call it, get the stuff out there quickly. And I think the stuff that you learn as a business is exponentially more valuable by doing that than if you kept it in the back end.
Kenny, any thoughts about this on your side?
I totally agree. I'm incredibly impatient when it comes to those things. And I think just like shipping, because it's also, I find that people get really hung up on their own sense of what the right feature set is, and they want to wait for something that may or may not make a difference, and it gets emotional. And I think just like shipping, just getting onto the sprints and sticking to it is definitely the way to do it. I think it enforces good architecture, I think, in the rest of the platform, right? Because we're often not talking about things that are totally encapsulated systems. They're connecting with other systems, with APIs and whatever. And that's where, I think also depending upon what the problem is, right? When forgetting about the recount for a second, going back to Disney and what we did there, a big part of the problem there was all of their teams needed to work in lockstep. The CMS team couldn't make changes without, like, they literally did not have proper separation. I'm totally talking out of school here in terms of what the problem was that we then went after and fixed. But when you guys took over the app development, and it was like, okay, let's just enforce some good API rules and force people to clean up their side of the fence. And that let us move faster on our side. And some of that, I think that's more in the lane of demo than proof of concept or MVP, because we knew we had a bad solution and we knew we needed a good one. But I think we use the same principles in terms of, let's build the simplest thing possible, get it up and running, and then start to iterate. And in general, yeah, I mean, you remember this. This is why you guys still have a ton of clients over at Disney, is that we just kind of, our frame rate was just like 2 or 3 times what other people were able to do. And that's significant.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I want to use this actually as a segue, because we have many people for large companies, and we know that large companies are a total different beast in terms of just innovation, launching a new product. Kenny, you before mentioned something about communication. Craig, you did mention about the reputational impact. So both of you come from that large company background. You're both leading right now like high-profile startups, but at the same time, you come from Disney, Viacom, Kenny, Fujitsu, for example, Craig. So very large companies in high-profile roles. So for you on your side, and I would like to start with Kenny, what's the difference and what are the considerations for POCs and MVPs? And I don't know, how do you use them? I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at the same time, but just that how is this relevant for large corporations? What are your learnings and what advice can you provide there?
I'm trying to think, like, really the issue there is there's huge cultural issues, right? Big, slow moving companies are very, in a way, really proud of, the systems they have, the success that they've had, and, and it's hard to break through on some of those things. And I think one of the ways that you can break through is with speed, right? And I think that's kind of the watchword on these things. But, I'll just go back and say, understanding not everything is a product problem. Like, and that's maybe the thing just to remember is, like, you put your whole plan together and then it needs to be like, well, which part of this is not a product problem? This is about culture. This is about organization. This is about alignment with existing strategy. Or I think in digital transformation, you end up in a place where you have to break with the old in order to move it to a new place, and make sure that you're not doing something that's going around a problem and pretending that it's not a problem. My friend Nick Rockwell, who was the CTO at the New York Times, he was our CTO at Viacom, and then he was the CTO and head of product at the New York Times for like the last 5 years, and really sort of saw them through all of this remake. He had a very simple rule: never go around, always go through. Like, you always have to go through the problem. Like, you can't just sort of accommodate the problem, no matter how big it is, because once you start distorting to accept something that you think actually needs to change in the future, you're doing the wrong thing. And it's more of a cultural problem and an organizational problem than we'll make the product a little different. We'll make 2 versions of the product, one for international. Like, there's all kinds of, bargaining and denial that people go through when they design the infrastructure for their company or even the product at its core.
I love that. Never go around, always go through. Yeah, really insightful.
Yeah, he's a great guy. You should interview him for another thing here. Nick is always brilliant.
Awesome. Great. What did you take there? Like, from the experience of a large company versus what you're doing on startup? Like how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think I think to Kenny's point, it's not a product problem, right? It's a people problem when you get to that size, and that's true of almost everything that you try to do in business, right? It's about managing stakeholders, whether that's up, sideways, or down, to make sure that you've got the support that you need. I think where I've seen it be successful, to take that slant slightly, I've seen a lot of products and innovation die in businesses because large businesses pretend. So what they will do is they will create an innovation hub, or whatever they call it, an innovation center. But they will center it under the old archaic framework of the organization, right? So they'll create a VP of innovation role, and they'll still reporting to the traditional CEO, and they'll have it in the same framework of an old business. One, I used to work for a massive plumbing and heating group who wanted to go e-commerce, like online, wanted to move it all online, went and bought a business out of California that was doing the stuff they wanted to be doing, and just forced it into a plumbing and heating business construct, right? So all of the KPIs, all the objectives, everything that was built in the business was built around selling hardware and selling plumbing and heating supplies out of a warehouse, right? So that was never, as much as they wanted to be innovating, that was never going to be aligned with the existing business model. Like, where I've seen it be successful is when you have the conviction as a larger business to completely separate it off, like almost a competitor, right? Go build, I used to work in a massive automotive tech business, right? And they said, there's a new CEO, there's a new business, we'll call it something different. It's a different legal entity. If you were to build what we have today again in 2021, go build it like that and compete against us as a business, right? And that is where true innovation comes from. It's not stifled by that old business model. So, I've kind of swayed off the topic slightly, but I think that's where it becomes successful. That's when you dive in with 2 feet. That's when Jim Collins says from great to good. You go do it. You go create something brand new and truly make it brand new. You don't force it into the old ways of doing things. So I've seen that's where it's been successful. But back to the big business question, it's all about people. Like, the first thing you should do in your first 90 days, just go charge your Starbucks card up and get everyone to like you. Like, forget anything technical, forget anything big wins. It's not about what you know. It's ultimately about the relationships you build in those big companies. So that's where to start.
Yeah. And how sometimes we forget about it, right? Like that part of in some way, the political side of it, and being able to create the relationships inside a large corporation, how important that is. So we are having a great conversation, but I'd love to leave some time for questions. So I actually would like to open up for questions. So just a reminder, some people are sending them on the chat. That's great. And also we have a QA section on Zoom. So if you have some questions, definitely please send them out there. Let me just start. So we have one question, and this is from David Cruz. So it's, is a POC always recommended before an MVP? This is an interesting question. Do you always do a POC before an MVP, or does it matter? Like, I don't know. We'd love to hear your thoughts there. Yeah. Kenny, I see you're reacting, but you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just, the shrug was the proof of concept, and here's the MVP. I think it depends. I think a proof of concept is probably more valuable in situations where there's some technical thing that you're trying to prove before you can move on to it, right? Because the proof of concept is going to be a raw or version of something that you're like, okay, yeah, there's enough there for us to dig in and do the rest of the work. So I think if it's a technical problem, worth it. If it's about selling in the rest of the company or doing test marketing with some customers, I don't think you need it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you said it earlier on, Kenny, when we were talking about like POCs and stuff. I think when you're building something net new and you genuinely can't find the answer as to whether it's going to work or not. Like they're like, like we were doing early on with the API integrations, like, I don't know. I genuinely wouldn't have known had we not done that POC, whether that was going to be a massive blocker for us or not. So I think in that particular case, I think a narrow POC to prove that one point before then bothering to invest in an MVP was important. But where it's an iteration on an existing problem or something that the answers to from a technical perspective, and it's just about UI, UX, proving assumptions, then potentially straight to MVP is the way to go.
Perfect. And being both of you on the startup world, and Kenny, and I know you have founded startups in the past as well. So we have this interesting anonymous question. Do you see the need to create an MVP or demo before pitching for funding? So would love to hear your thoughts. Like, is that necessary? Like we've heard the stories of people just getting funding out of a napkin. At the same time, we heard a lot of like, get some traction. I always get that contradictive feedback. So we'd love to hear what you think there.
I think I don't think you need to. I don't think you need to. I think need to know what your TAM is. I think if you know what the addressable market is and your angle is, that you're going to get a piece of that TAM in a new way that feels sustainable and scalable, that's what people are looking for, because VCs love to sort of noodle around with stuff, but at the end of the day, they need to believe that it's a business. So I would say, instead I would spend, I'm going to make up a number here, but before, like, if you thought that it was like 70% build your product, 30% figure out what the market is for it, you should probably flip that and spend more time talking to customers or figuring out what's going on, unless it's a technical breakthrough kind of thing, right? Like, so before this webinar, Jorge and I were talking about Beat Saber, right? If it's a game, we know the addressable market for games is big. You need, like, in that case, I think the proof of concept or the MVP is more important, because you need to prove that you have the goods. But so I think it comes down to, like, where's the risk? Is the risk about finding a big market, or is it actual technical risk in terms of this is a difficult design or computer science problem to solve?
Awesome. And Craig, you raised capital, like it was around September was the official announcement. So yeah, we'd definitely love to hear your thoughts here as well. So you have it fresh.
I think the honest answer, which is not a popular one, is it depends. Like, and we went through a ton of kind of VC meetings last year. I think Kenny said a great word, which is risk. I think you've got to think about it from the VC's perspective, and where is the risk, right? Now, from our perspective, we had a ton of experience between me and Corey in cybersecurity. So there was no doubt to investors when they looked at us that we had the technical nous to create something that the cybersecurity industry would want, right? So we didn't have an MVP. We went with an idea. Our model was a little bit different. We already have revenue, like we're already selling to customers, and ours was about automating that. So actually, there was a less need to demonstrate that technical prowess. So the risk for them was much more about could we make this a successful business, as opposed to could we do it technically, because they knew we'd have the capability to do that. So to Kenny's point, I think you need to think about it from the investor's perspective. Like, if you're brand new, right, and you haven't got work experience, you haven't got 20 years in cybersecurity to back you up, then the likelihood is, because you can guess this, the VC is going to go, well, where's my risk? It's probably in you, right? So I'm going to want to see more about what is the art of the possible and what you're creating. So in that case, you hedge that risk by building more, right? Demonstrating more, showing what it is that you're capable of doing. But I think the traditional VC model, we've railed against it a little bit. We found an incredible investor who was a little bit outside of what you would expect. I think the traditional VCs are looking for a product, right? More than anything, but more and more that industry is moving now to invest in the people. Like, are the founders the right people? Have you got the right drive? Have you got the right passion? Is it something you're capable of doing? So I think looking across that spectrum where the risk is, that's where you need to fill the gaps when you go and speak to those investors.
Awesome. I think this definitely has been super useful. We are 4 minutes about to end the webinar. I mean, there's a lot of questions and a lot of things that we could continue discussing about. We will provide your contact as well, so people can contact you directly if they have more questions and such. And we're gonna definitely publish this video for reference for others. I think I would actually like to just jump to some final words, like maybe in like a 30-second, each of you, just like what if you could summarize for you what's important for successfully executing POCs and MVPs in your experience, what would you advise the public here in the webinar? So I don't know who wants to start.
Craig, why don't you go first? I've gone first.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say. So I think, so from a practical standpoint, I think, what we've said throughout this is defining what success looks like for you. Like, certainly with the POC and MVP, less so when you get into the kind of then the constant maneuvering of building a product, but certainly in POC and MVP, for me, it's about defining what you want to achieve out of those things. Like and it sounds simple, but loads of people dive headlong into an MVP because they're excited about the product, but actually what is the POC designed to do? What is that technical thing that you're trying to prove? And then what is that MVP for? Like, what is the core functionality of that product? Like, I do it, and that's why I say Stephanie and our product team keeps me on track, because I get all excited about stuff and I might build that, and Steph's like, no, that's not core. That's not core. Maybe in 3 years, not now. Like, that's not core. So you have to decide that. And then the last bit that I'd say is completely intangible, but it's just passion for it. Like, what's fantastic about the Cyvatar team is that everyone is just really passionate about what they're building. We can tell our salespeople, like, you don't have to lie anymore. Like, what we're saying is not only the right thing, but it's true as well. Like, everyone's really passionate. And I think if you build that passion, it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but if you've got that passion and you know what you want to achieve, those two components, I think you'll be on the right track.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Kenny? What would be your advice?
I think that's, I agree with everything that Craig said. And I would just say, make sure, do you guys know what a kitchen cabinet means? Like, it's your sort of your informal advisors, your informal people. I think it comes from some US president who had a cabinet and then a kitchen cabinet of people who he's really talking to and taking advice from. I think it might've been Truman, but have your kitchen cabinet. Like, make sure you're not defining it just as a product problem. Have a client who wants to use it, whether they're in-house or out of house. Have a business person alongside the product person so that the assumptions you're making in terms of what you're trying to do. So you're sort of getting over some of the stuff that if you come at it purely as a product problem, it's like, yeah, that's all great, except you're not going to have the rights for that, or whatever, the kinds of things that get you hung up later on.
Awesome. Well, I think this is great. Well, thank you, Kenny and Craig. I think this has been a great webinar, very successful. We have a lot of questions that we want to answer. There's going to be a couple of, we basically are trying to do this initially every 2 months, having guests. And actually, some of you may want to be part of it. And we're sending a survey of things that you want to know and learn more. And also, many of you come from different networks that we're part of. Definitely, we're going to reach you and see if you want to be part of this webinars. But yeah, again, thank you very much. There's going to be a survey that we're going to be sending, and we're going to be sharing the video. But again, I think this was a great webinar. Remember, we're basically working with the idea of focusing these webinars on product strategy, product design, and product engineering. So thank you very much, and have a great day. And we have the contact information there for if you want to reach out, just Kenny at The Recount, Craig at cyvatar.ai, or Jorge at Hello Iconic. And then you have our Twitters there also if you want to reach out. Well, thank you. Bye-bye.